The bells of St. Matthew's Cathedral tolled 11 times, each chime a heavy, resonant blow against the morning quiet. At the back of the cavernous nave, Lucy Montgomery stood clutching a bouquet of white lilies, her knuckles pale and bloodless. The flowers, stark and pristine, felt more appropriate for a funeral than a wedding, her own. With each step she took down the long, crimson-carpeted aisle, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. This was the elite of Pittsburgh, the medical and social royalty among whom she had once belonged, back when the Montgomery name meant more than mounting hospital bills and desperate whispered deals. At the altar, Dr. Logan Anderson waited. He was devastatingly handsome, his dark hair perfectly styled, his tailored tuxedo fitting his athletic frame with an easy grace, but his gray eyes, the color of surgical steel, were cold and distant. As she reached his side, the scent of lilies and old incense thick in the air, he leaned toward her, his breath warm against her ear, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "Let's just get this over with." The ceremony proceeded like a meticulously rehearsed play. Logan's responses were clipped and mechanically correct, delivered with the same detached professionalism he likely used when discussing treatment options with a patient. When the time came for the rings, his touch was brief, cool, and impersonal. A transaction. The kiss, when it finally happened, was a mere press of lips, cold and clinical. The sealing of a contract, not the celebration of a union. In the back of the cathedral, Lucy could see Dr. Vincent Anderson, Logan's father, beaming with a satisfaction that was almost predatory. This was his moment of triumph, the day the upstart Anderson name was finally irrevocably linked to the old money aristocracy of the Montgomerys. It was only in the silent, leather-scented confines of the limousine that the facade shattered completely. Logan ripped at his bow tie, loosening it with an angry tug before turning to stare out the tinted window, his jaw tight. "The reception," Lucy began, her voice small. 3 hours, he cut her off, his tone sharp as a scalpel. "We show up, we shake hands, we cut the cake, and we dance exactly once for the photographers. After that, you can do whatever you want. I have a surgery scheduled for 6 a.m. A spark of defiance flickered through her despair. "It's our wedding day." He finally turned to look at her then, and his cold gray eyes held a complex, bitter mixture of resentment and something that might have been pity. "No, Miss Montgomery. Mrs. Anderson, I suppose. This is not our wedding day." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "This is the day my father bought your family's name, and I paid the price for his social climbing. Nothing more. Nothing less." As the limousine glided through the streets of Pittsburgh, the city a blur of steel and glass outside the window, Lucy understood with a devastating, soul-crushing clarity that she had just traded her freedom for her mother's life. Somewhere across town, Rose Montgomery was breathing on a machine, her every breath paid for by this hollow, loveless sham. And here, sitting beside the stranger who was now her husband, Lucy felt her heart begin to crack under the weight of a marriage that felt less like a new beginning and more like a life sentence. 3 years earlier, the Montgomery mansion had been the crown jewel of Pittsburgh's Shadyside district, a testament to generations of wealth and influence. Now, at 21, Lucy stood in what used to be her father's grand wood-paneled study, watching strangers in polo shirts catalog their lives for auction. "The Waterford Crystal Collection should fetch a decent price," one of the appraisers murmured into a small recorder. Across the room, her mother, Rose Montgomery, sat rigidly in a wingback chair, her hands trembling in her lap. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice a thin, brittle thing. Lucy didn't have to ask who she meant. Her father had vanished again, leaving behind a trail of empty liquor bottles and gambling slips as the only evidence of his presence. The pharmaceutical empire that had sustained their family for a century was gone, sold off piece by piece to cover her father's spiraling debts. The investments, the trust funds, even the money set aside for Lucy's college education, all of it had been sacrificed at the altar of his addiction. The appraiser cleared his throat, his expression a mixture of pity and professional impatience. "We need to discuss the removal schedule. The bank requires the house to be vacated by the end of the month." 4 days. They had 4 days. That night, as Lucy helped her mother sort through old photo albums, one of the few possessions they were allowed to keep, Rose finally broke. The collapse was sudden and terrifying. The heart attack, as the doctors at UPMC Presbyterian Hospital later explained, was severe. Months of financial pressure, the quiet malnutrition of skipping meals, the sheer emotional trauma of losing everything, it had all taken its toll. "She'll need extensive treatment," a kind-faced cardiologist named Dr. Morrison told Lucy in the hallway, his voice gentle. "Surgery, ongoing medication, round-the-clock care. I won't lie to you, Miss Montgomery. This will not be inexpensive." Lucy stared at the estimated cost sheet, the numbers swimming before her eyes. Even with their dwindling insurance, the out-of-pocket expenses were staggering, an insurmountable mountain of debt. It was then that Dr. Vincent Anderson appeared, striding down the hospital corridor like an angel of mercy in a bespoke suit. "Lucy, my dear," he said, his arms open, his smile radiating warmth. "I came as soon as I heard about Rose. How is she?" Vincent had been a family friend for years, a contemporary of her father's who had always orbited their social circle. "You mustn't worry about the medical bills," he assured her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Rose will receive the very best care available. I'll see to it personally." He leaned in, his voice conspiratorial and kind. "Your grandfather helped me establish my first practice decades ago. This is simply me returning a favor." 3 weeks later, Rose was stable, but far from recovered. Vincent invited Lucy to lunch at the elegant Duquesne Club to discuss your mother's long-term care. It was there, over lobster bisque and sparkling water, that he laid his cards on the table. He spoke of a mutually beneficial arrangement, a marriage. "Your mother would receive the finest medical treatment, all expenses covered, indefinitely," he explained, his tone smooth as silk. "You would be freed from the burden of working multiple jobs just to survive. And my son, Logan, would have a wife who understands the weight and responsibility of a family name." That night, sitting by her mother's hospital bed, Lucy watched the rhythmic pulse of the machines that were keeping Rose alive. She tried to imagine another way out. Her 3 part-time jobs barely covered the rent on their tiny new apartment and groceries. The medical bills were multiplying daily. Without Vincent's intervention, her mother would be transferred to a state-run facility where the care would be adequate at best, and more likely, fatal. Rose stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "What are you thinking about, darling?" she asked, her voice weak. Lucy looked at her mother's pale, beloved face and felt her own heart break all over again. She forced a smile. "Nothing important, Mom. Just planning the future." But even as she said the words, Lucy knew there was no future for her to plan. Vincent Anderson had seen to that. He had trapped her as surely as if he had locked her in a cage, using her love for her mother as the key. The wedding was set for 6 weeks later. Vincent Anderson stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, gazing out at the confluence of the 3 rivers that formed Pittsburgh's Golden Triangle. At 62, he had amassed everything a man could want. A medical empire worth hundreds of millions, a reputation that commanded respect in the operating room, and a portfolio of real estate that spanned the city. Everything except the one thing that mattered most to him: acceptance. The polite rejection from earlier that day still stung like a physical blow. The 3 lawyers, representing the old money gatekeepers of Pittsburgh's most exclusive social clubs, had been condescendingly gentle. "Your family lacks the historical connections, the social standing our clients require in their associates," their spokesman James Harrison had explained. "Nothing personal, you understand. Simply a matter of maintaining standards." Standards. After they had left, Vincent sat alone in his silent office, a cold fury burning in his chest. 40 years he had spent building his practice from the ground up, revolutionizing cardiac surgery in the city, saving the lives of men whose grandfathers had looked down on his immigrant parents. And still, they dismissed him. Nouveau riche. Common. That evening, Vincent found himself driving slowly past the Montgomery mansion, its darkened windows staring out like hollow eyes. The demolition was scheduled for the following week. He remembered the parties his father-in-law, the old Dr. Montgomery, used to host there, elegant affairs where the city's founding families drank champagne and discussed art, literature, and politics. He had attended as a guest, always on the periphery, an outsider allowed a brief glimpse into a world he could never truly enter. The Montgomerys, on the other hand, were American aristocracy. Their ancestors had ridden with Washington, their fortune built on pharmaceutical patents that had changed modern medicine. Even now, bankrupt and broken, the Montgomery name carried more weight in the circles Vincent desperately wanted to conquer than all his millions ever could. And that's when the idea, cold and brilliant, began to form. The plan took shape over the next few weeks. He did his research. The gambling debts left by Lucy's father were even more catastrophic than was publicly known. Rose Montgomery's medical condition was genuinely dire. And Lucy was perfect, beautiful, educated in all the right ways, and utterly, hopelessly desperate. She carried the one asset he could not buy, a name that would unlock every door that had ever been closed to him. Logan, predictably, did not take the news well. He stormed into Vincent's office, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "You want me to marry a girl I've barely spoken to? Have you lost your mind?" "I want you to marry a Montgomery." "There's a significant difference," Vincent replied calmly, gesturing to a file on his desk. "Her name, Logan, her lineage, a social standing that predates this entire city." "What about Rebecca?" Logan shot back. "We've been together for 2 years. Rebecca is a model," Vincent dismissed, his voice brutal in its honesty. "She is beautiful, charming, and entirely unsuitable." "She is for entertainment, Logan, not for partnership." "And if I refuse?" Logan challenged, his jaw tight. Vincent's expression turned to ice. "Then you can explain to your patients why their head of neurosurgery is suddenly unavailable. The Anderson Medical Center made you one of the youngest department heads in the country, Logan. It can just as easily make you unemployed." The threat, unspoken but absolute, hung between them like a guillotine's blade. That night, Logan drove to Rebecca's apartment to end a 2-year relationship. She wasn't surprised, only bitter. "Your father has been circling that girl like a shark since the day her family went bankrupt," she'd said, her voice laced with venom. Everyone saw it coming. 6 weeks later, Logan stood at the altar, watching a young woman he barely knew walk toward him in a cloud of white silk and shattered dreams. And he understood with perfect soul-crushing clarity that he had just traded his own freedom for his father's ambition. The penthouse apartment at 1 Oxford Centre had been featured in Architectural Digest twice. Perched 37 floors above Pittsburgh, it was a monument to wealth and success, a fortress of glass, steel, and cold, minimalist art. It was also, Lucy realized within hours of moving in, the loneliest place she had ever lived. "Your room is down the hall," Logan said, his tone clipped as he gestured vaguely toward the east wing. He barely glanced at the single suitcase she had brought with her. "The housekeeper comes on Tuesdays and Fridays." Before Lucy could form a response, he disappeared into his home office, the door closing behind him with a soft, definitive click. The first weeks established a routine of mutual avoidance. He left for the hospital before dawn and often returned long after she had retreated to her room. When their paths did cross in the vast, silent apartment, he treated her with the same polite, professional efficiency he likely used with pharmaceutical reps. He was cordial, he was correct, and he was utterly devoid of warmth. Lucy threw herself into visiting her mother, spending entire days at the hospital. The private room Vincent had arranged was like a luxury hotel suite, complete with fresh flowers delivered daily and a private nursing staff. Rose was improving, the color returning to her cheeks, but her eyes were sharp. "You're too thin, darling," she observed during one visit, her hand fluttering over Lucy's. "Are you eating properly?" "I'm fine, Mom." Lucy forced a bright smile. "The treatment is working. You look so much better." "Thanks to your sacrifice," Rose whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "My dear, brave girl. What have I allowed you to do?" "You didn't allow anything," Lucy lied, smoothing the blanket over her mother's legs. "I chose this." It was a fiction they both pretended to believe. The first real crisis came 3 weeks into the marriage. Logan was on a marathon shift at the hospital, and his personal cell phone, left charging on the kitchen island, began to ring. Thinking it might be an emergency, Lucy answered. "Logan? You finally picked up. I've been trying you all day." The voice on the other end was feminine, breathless, with the kind of polished, confident tone that comes from years of being admired. "I know you said you needed space," the woman continued, "but I can't stop thinking about what we talked about us. I think I was too hasty." "I'm sorry," Lucy interrupted, her own voice quiet but firm. "This isn't Logan. This is Mrs. Anderson." The silence that followed was deafening, a crackle of static and disbelief. "Mrs. Anderson," the woman repeated slowly, the name tasting like poison. "I see. Well, would Mrs. Anderson be so kind as to tell my fiancé that Rebecca called?" The word hit Lucy like a physical blow. "Your fiancé?" Rebecca's laugh was like the sound of shattering glass. "Oh, did he not tell you? We've been engaged for 6 months. Unofficially, of course. Logan wanted to wait until after his father's hospital expansion was complete. But I suppose those plans changed." Her voice was dripping with bitter sarcasm. "Perhaps you can let him know I called." When Logan returned late that night, looking exhausted, Lucy was waiting for him in the living room. The phone sat on the coffee table between them like a piece of evidence. "Rebecca called," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. The confrontation that followed was not loud or dramatic, but cold and brutal. "You were engaged," Lucy stated, her voice flat. "You were engaged to someone else while your father was negotiating our marriage." "Ex-fiancé," Logan corrected, his voice sharp as he poured himself a whiskey. "And no, it's not relevant." "How long before?" she pressed. He tossed back half the glass in one swallow. 2 days. The admission hung in the air, a lit fuse. 2 days. He had been promised to another woman just 2 days before he stood at the altar with her. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it stole her breath. Tears she refused to let fall burned the back of her throat. "I see," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Well, thank you for clarifying the timeline. It certainly puts our wedding day into perspective." She stood up, her composure cracking. "Go to her, Logan. Stop pretending you're trapped here with me when you're just running back to her at every opportunity." He grabbed his car keys from the counter, his face a mask of cold fury. "Fine," he bit out, his voice laced with a cruelty that was meant to wound. "At least with her, I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not." The words struck her with the force of a slap. He turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him, the sound echoing the final, violent breaking of her heart. The annual hospital gala at the Omni William Penn Hotel was everything Lucy had expected. Opulent, suffocating, and meticulously designed to showcase the social triumph of the Anderson family. She moved through the glittering ballroom like an actress in a well-rehearsed play, smiling at the right moments, making the appropriate small talk, and allowing Logan's hand to rest possessively on the small of her back as he charmed donors and hospital board members. They were the perfect couple, she thought bitterly. Beautiful, well-bred, and utterly, completely miserable. Halfway through the evening, Logan leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Darling, I need to take this call," he murmured, his voice a smooth performance for anyone watching. "It's the hospital, an emergency consult." He slipped away toward the terrace for privacy, but in his haste, he left his personal cell phone on their table. A moment later, the screen lit up with an incoming message. Lucy glanced down reflexively. The name on the screen was Rebecca. The message beneath it made her blood run cold. "Missing you tonight. Wish I could be your date instead of pretending with her." Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen, a war raging within her. It was an invasion of privacy, a line she shouldn't cross, but his cruelty, his coldness, the lie she was living. It pushed her over the edge. She unlocked the phone. His passcode, she guessed grimly, was the year his mother had died. She was right. The message thread opened, revealing weeks of texts, a secret timeline that ran parallel to their entire marriage. There were plans for clandestine meetings, intimate inside jokes, and photos that she couldn't bring herself to examine too closely. Her eyes scanned the dates. Tuesday. Last Tuesday night, when Logan had come home near midnight, smelling of expensive perfume, not hospital antiseptic, claiming he'd been pulled into an emergency surgery. It was all there, a detailed, undeniable record of his betrayal. "Sorry about that." Logan's voice behind her made her jump, her heart leaping into her throat. "Just a consult about tomorrow's surgery." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes locking on the phone in her hands, then on the shattered expression on her face. The color drained from his. "Lucy, emergency surgery?" Her voice was a deadly quiet whisper. "Is that what you're calling it now?" The world around them, the laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, the swell of the string quartet, seemed to fade into a distant, muffled roar. They were trapped in a perfect, devastating bubble of silence. "We should go home," Logan said, his voice low and strained, reaching for her arm. The ride back to the penthouse was a suffocating 20-minute eternity. The moment the heavy apartment door clicked shut behind them, the careful composure Lucy had maintained all evening finally broke. 3 months, she said, her voice shaking with a cold, quiet rage. "We have been married for 3 months, and you have not stopped seeing her. Not for a single day." "Lucy, let me explain." "Explain what?" she shot back, whirling to face him. "Explain how you've been lying to my face every single night you come home late? How you've been sleeping with another woman while I play the part of the dutiful wife for your father's cameras?" Logan loosened his tie with a sharp, agitated tug. "Our marriage isn't real. You said it yourself. It's a business arrangement. An arrangement that I assumed came with a basic clause of fidelity. Did you think I wouldn't care? Did you think I was so pathetic, so grateful for your family's charity, that I would just accept being humiliated like this? You're not being humiliated. I am your wife." The words exploded out of her, raw and full of pain. "Whatever the circumstances, whatever the reasons, I am legally, publicly, and socially your wife, and you are making a fool out of me." His own composure finally snapped. "What did you expect from me? Love? Romance? Some fairy tale ending where we fall into each other's arms and live happily ever after?" "I expected basic respect. I expected you to honor the commitment you made, even if you didn't want to make it." Her voice broke, thick with months of suppressed grief. "I gave up everything for this marriage, Logan. My freedom, my future, my chance at ever finding someone who might actually love me. And you can't even grant me the dignity of being faithful? I never asked you to sacrifice anything." "Yes, you did," she cried, tears finally streaming down her face. "Every time you treated me like a stranger in our own home. Every time you made me feel like an unwanted guest. Every time you reminded me that this marriage was just an inconvenience you had to endure. You were asking me to sacrifice my self-worth for your comfort." He stared at her, a look of genuine shock replacing the anger on his face. He had never seen her like this, never seen the fire and the pain behind her quiet, polite facade. "Lucy!" "And the worst part," she whispered, her voice cracking, "is that I was making excuses for you, telling myself that you were just as trapped as I was. But you weren't trapped. You had it all. The social benefits of a marriage to me, and the emotional comfort of a real relationship with her." Her grief hardened back into fury. "Get out!" she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. "Go to her! Go to your precious Rebecca who you actually want. Stop pretending you're stuck here with me when you've been running to her every chance you get." He stared at her for a long, silent moment, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, anger, guilt, and something that looked terrifyingly like regret. He grabbed his keys from the counter, turned, and walked out. The apartment door slammed behind him with a force that rattled the windows, leaving Lucy alone with the echoing silence and the terrible, soul-crushing knowledge that her sacrifice had all been for nothing. Outside, the sound of Logan's engine roared to life. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, Lucy's words ringing in his ears. "Coward. Liar. You had it all." The truth of her accusations hit him with the force of a physical blow. He pressed his foot down on the accelerator, the powerful car surging forward, desperate to outrun the man he had become. The city lights blurred into streaks of red and gold. The speedometer climbed, 60, 80, 100 miles per hour. He barely saw the red light at Fifth Avenue. He barely saw the semi-truck already halfway through the intersection. The world exploded in a symphony of screaming metal and shattering glass. In the split second before darkness claimed him, the last coherent thought that flashed through Logan's mind was the image of Lucy's face, not angry, not accusing, but utterly, completely heartbroken. He had broken something precious, something he never realized he wanted, until it was too late. The sound of sirens grew louder, racing toward the twisted wreckage where the life of Dr. Logan Anderson had just ended, and where, if he survived, something entirely new would have to begin. 3 months after the accident, the penthouse no longer felt like Logan Anderson's silent marble fortress. The luxury still clung to every surface, but something fundamental had changed. The space held warmth now. A soft blanket was folded carelessly over the arm of the sofa. The throw pillows bore the impression of use, and the faint, clean scent of chamomile tea lingered in the air. And in the living room, where a cold, abstract painting once dominated the main wall, now stood the hospital bed that had quietly rewritten both of their lives. Lucy moved through the space with a quiet grace that was no longer just duty. It was devotion disguised as routine. In her hands, she carried a tray with a bowl of chicken soup, steam curling from its surface. She stopped beside his wheelchair, which was positioned by the floor-to-ceiling window, the afternoon sun painting his sharp features in muted gold. "Lunch," she said softly, her voice a gentle command. Logan's jaw tightened, a familiar flicker of defiance in his eyes. "I can feed myself." "I know." She pulled a small chair closer, her smile patient, almost teasing. "But humor me. Let me do it today." Their eyes met, and for the first time, he didn't fight her. A silent surrender passed between them. She lifted the spoon to his lips. He accepted it. Slowly. Her fingers brushed against his as she steadied the bowl, and for a brief, charged second, neither of them pulled away. The contact was feather-light, but it sent a current through the quiet room. "You've gotten better at this," he murmured after a few spoonfuls, his tone softer than she had ever heard it. "At taking care of you?" she asked, her voice light, trying to deflect the sudden intimacy of the moment. "No," he said, his gaze steady. "At being near me, without flinching." Lucy's smile faltered. "Well, you haven't bitten me in 2 weeks. That helps." His laugh surprised them both. It wasn't a smirk or a dry chuckle. It was a real laugh, a sound that seemed to pull something loose in her own chest. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Then, unexpectedly, He spoke again, his voice low. "Do you think I was born this bitter?" Her brow furrowed. She considered the question, her spoon hovering. "No," she said finally. "I think someone, or something, taught you how to be." The spoon in her hand stilled. His eyes flickered, shadows moving through their grey depths. "My mother died when I was 8, he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Ovarian cancer. By the time they found it, it was everywhere. I spent 2 years in and out of hospitals, watching her slip away while I pretended not to be terrified." Lucy's throat tightened. She didn't move, didn't breathe, afraid of shattering the fragile, painful honesty that was pouring out of him. "My father buried himself in his work. He couldn't stand the sight of weakness, of illness. So I learned how to read morphine dosages before I learned fractions. I learned how to be the man of the house when I was still just a boy." He let out a short, harsh laugh. "And when she was gone, I swore I would never let anyone matter that much again." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes stripped of all their usual defenses. "Rebecca was perfect for that," he admitted, his voice raw. "Beautiful, shallow, safe. I never let her get close enough to hurt me." Lucy swallowed hard, her own heart aching for the little boy he had been. "And me?" she whispered. His gaze was intense, unwavering. "You terrified me," he said, the admission a quiet explosion. "From the very beginning, because you saw right through all the walls I'd built. You weren't impressed. You didn't bow. And the closer you got—" His words faltered, and he let out a shaky breath. "The more I wanted to let you matter." The sudden chime of the doorbell made them both jump. The moment was broken. Lucy set the tray aside and went to the door. A moment later she returned, holding a bouquet of white tulips wrapped in simple brown paper. The scent, sharp and sweet, filled the room. "There's no name," she said, her voice faltering slightly as she looked at him. Logan cleared his throat, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "They're from me." She looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You sent these?" He shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair, looking almost boyish in his awkwardness. "I thought it was time I said thank you. Properly." Tucked into the flowers was a small card. His handwriting was sharp, precise, but the words were careful. "For the woman who stayed when she didn't have to. Who saw me when I couldn't see myself. This is just the beginning." "Logan." Lucy's breath caught. She crossed the room slowly, sat on the edge of his bed, and leaned down to press a soft, lingering kiss to his forehead. It was a gesture of comfort, of forgiveness, of something more. "This meant more than you know," she whispered against his skin. Logan's smile was faint, tired, but it was the most genuine thing she had ever seen on his face. "Then maybe," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm finally learning." That evening, they ended up on the sofa together, a forgotten movie flickering on the screen. The hospital bed had been pushed to the corner for the night. Lucy was telling him a story about her first waitressing job, how she'd once spilled an entire pitcher of iced tea into a city councilman's lap. She gestured with her hands as she spoke, her laughter spilling from her lips like music. Logan found himself laughing with her, and then he just stopped. He just watched her. In the soft glow of the television, she was radiant, unguarded, free, vibrantly alive. And for the first time, he didn't see her as his wife by arrangement, or the woman tethered to his broken body by duty. He saw her, just Lucy, the woman who was, quietly and irrevocably, stealing his heart. He didn't say it. He wasn't ready. But something inside him shifted, a final wall crumbling to dust. He was falling. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to. Lucy thought the apartment was quiet when she slipped into her bedroom. She left the door slightly ajar, kicked off her flats, and began to unbutton her blouse, the relief of shedding the day's clothes a quiet sigh. The city lights poured through the tall window, spilling across her back in silver and gold. Logan shouldn't have been there. He had woken up, restless, his body aching from hours spent in one position, and had wheeled himself toward the kitchen for a glass of water. Passing her doorway, he hadn't meant to look, but he did, and for a single suspended heartbeat, the world froze. Her back, pale and luminous in the soft light, the dark silk of her hair falling over her shoulders, the delicate, graceful curve of her waist as she reached for a sweater. It was only a second before she would turn and see him, but that 1 second branded itself onto his mind like fire. Lucy gasped, clutching the half-unbuttoned blouse to her chest, her cheeks flooding with color. "Logan!" He looked stricken, caught somewhere between shame and awe. I'm sorry," he stammered, his words tripping over themselves. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't—" She pulled the sweater on quickly, her hands trembling. "It's fine," she said, her voice unsteady but not angry. "Just forget it." But neither of them could. Later, Logan lay in his hospital bed staring at the ceiling. He turned onto his side, then back again. His body was exhausted, but his mind was a relentless, replaying loop. Every time he closed his eyes, the image returned. The glow from the window, the way her skin had captured the light, the startled look in her eyes as she'd turned. It wasn't lust. Not simply. It was recognition. For months, Lucy had been a presence at his side, feeding him, helping him walk, laughing at his sarcasm. But tonight, he had seen her differently. Not as the caregiver, not as the woman bound to him by an arrangement neither of them had chosen. As a woman. And for the first time in years, Logan Anderson felt a desire so sharp, so acute, it kept him wide awake. Minutes bled into an hour, then 2. When the clock on his phone read 1:47 a.m., he gave up the pretense of trying to sleep. He pushed himself up, grabbed his cane from where it rested against the bed, and slowly, painstakingly, made his way toward the kitchen. She was already there. She was barefoot, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing an oversized university sweatshirt that fell almost to her knees. The kettle was whistling softly on the stove, and she was rubbing her arms against the chill. Logan's steps were uneven, the tap of his cane a soft counterpoint to the hum of the refrigerator, but she heard him immediately. She turned, her eyes wide with surprise, her cheeks already flushed, not just from the heat of the stove. "You're awake?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, leaning lightly on his cane. His voice was rough from disuse, but there was something else in it too. A new, fragile vulnerability. "Do you mind if I join you?" She hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "Of course." They sat on the sofa with steaming mugs of tea, the city lights twinkling like a fallen constellation beyond the glass. At first, they drank in silence. The kind of silence that buzzes, heavy with words that neither dares to speak. Finally, Logan set his mug down on the floor, his hand lingering on the warm porcelain as if to steady himself. "Lucy, I need to tell you something about earlier." Her heart gave a painful leap. She clutched her own mug tighter. "Logan, you don't have to—" "Yes," he interrupted, his voice firm. "I do." He leaned forward, his gray eyes locking onto hers, intense and serious. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy. I swear I wasn't watching. But when I saw you—" His jaw tightened. He stopped, exhaling a sharp, frustrated breath. "I can't stop thinking about it." The words hung in the air between them. Lucy's throat went dry. "I don't want you to think I'm some kind of creep," Logan continued quickly, his voice urgent now. "It wasn't like that. It's just, for the first time since we met, I really saw you. Not the woman trapped in this arrangement, not the caregiver, just you. A woman. And it—" He shook his head, almost in disbelief at himself. It did something to me I wasn't expecting. She looked down into her mug, her voice barely a whisper. You don't have to apologize because I liked it. His head snapped up, his eyes wide. She swallowed, forcing the words out, forcing the truth. It was the first time I felt like you were looking at me like a woman, not like someone you were stuck with. Logan's breath hitched, sharp and uneven. Slowly, as if moving through water, he reached out, his fingers tracing the delicate line of her jaw. Her skin tingled under his touch. She didn't pull away. His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her lips. He leaned closer, his eyes burning into hers. Not in my wildest dreams, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Did I imagine I would ever want you this much? Lucy's breath faltered. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Logan's thumb slid gently across her lower lip, lingering. Her chest rose and fell in a shallow rhythm, each inhale catching as if her body were responding to him before her mind could. Then, slowly, he leaned in. His lips brushed against hers, tentative, questioning. A near kiss that trembled with months of unspoken tension. It lingered there, a breath away from becoming real. When he started to pull back, she closed the distance herself, her lips pressing against his in a sudden, breathless urgency. The kiss deepened instantly. There was no hesitation this time. Her hands slid up to his shoulders, her fingers tangling in the soft fabric of his shirt. His arm wrapped firmly around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Months of silence and restraint and resentment shattered in that one explosive moment. The tea grew cold on the table, forgotten. The city outside continued to glitter. But for Logan and Lucy, time had narrowed to this. The taste of each other, the heat of skin against skin, the dizzying, terrifying realization that they had finally, irrevocably, crossed a line from which neither of them wanted to return. The kiss deepened until neither of them could remember who had moved first. It was a desperate, hungry thing, fueled by months of unspoken longing and quiet observation. Lucy clung to him, her fingers twisting in the fabric of his shirt as if she were afraid he might vanish if she let go. Logan's hand, which had been hesitant at first, slid confidently to the small of her back, molding her against him, closing any remaining distance. They had orbited each other in a cold, silent universe for so long, bound by duty and resentment. Now, the dam had broken. When their lips finally parted, they were both breathing heavily, their foreheads pressed together in the dim light of the living room. "Lucy," Logan whispered, his voice rough, almost a plea. He was trembling slightly. "If I keep going, I'm not going to be able to stop." Her chest rose and fell in a sharp, unsteady rhythm, her pulse racing so fast she could barely hear her own thoughts. She lifted her gaze to his. In his eyes, she saw not the arrogant, cold doctor, but a man laid bare, his desire and his fear warring on his face. "Then don't stop," she breathed. It was all the permission he needed. He kissed her again, but this time it was different. Slower. Deeper. He savored her, tasting her as if he were a starving man who had just been offered a feast. When he gently guided her toward his bedroom, the room that had been his solitary fortress, she followed without hesitation, her hand locked in his. There was no rush. Logan's movements were careful, almost reverent, as if he were afraid she might shatter. He traced the line of her jaw with his fingertips, brushed stray strands of hair from her face, and kissed her as if she were a rare and precious discovery. He unwrapped her from her oversized sweatshirt with a tenderness that made her ache. And Lucy felt alive in a way she never had before. She had been loved once, a long time ago, but that felt like a pale, childish imitation of this. Her life had been consumed by responsibility, by grief, by the duty of being a daughter. She had never known what it was to be truly wanted, to be looked at as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. That night, in Logan's arms, She finally understood. The morning arrived quietly, the first pale light of dawn creeping through the blinds. Lucy stirred, a soft sigh escaping her lips. For a blissful, disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she felt it. The solid weight of Logan's arm draped protectively over her waist, the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing against her hair, the radiating warmth of his chest at her back. Her eyes flew open. It really happened. She turned slowly, carefully in his arms, and found him already awake, watching her. The look in his eyes was soft, unguarded, and full of a quiet wonder. His hand came up, his thumb brushing gently over her cheek with a tenderness that stole her breath. "Was that real?" she whispered, her voice cracking, betraying the storm of emotions inside her. "Did I really just sleep with Logan Anderson?" A faint, almost incredulous smile touched his lips. "You did," he confirmed, his voice a low rumble. "And it was the most real thing I've ever known." She let out a soft, nervous, almost giddy laugh. "Rebecca would never believe you." His eyes darkened, but not with anger, with a fierce, unwavering devotion. "Forget Rebecca, forget the past." He shifted closer, his gaze intense. "Lucy, last night, that wasn't just about passion. For me, with you, it was love." Her heart stumbled. She searched his face, half afraid this was a dream, that he was playing a part, that this was another performance. But there was no armor left in his expression, no arrogance, no cruelty. Just Logan, open, vulnerable, and completely, terrifyingly hers. "Love?" she repeated, the word a breathless puff of air. "Love," he confirmed, his voice thick with conviction. "For the first time in my life, I don't feel empty. You filled every part of me I didn't even know was hollow." Her laugh bubbled up again, soft and disbelieving, but her eyes shone with tears. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he whispered, leaning in to kiss her nose, then her lips, then the corner of her smile. That morning marked the shift from which they would never return. The couple who had once passed each other like ghosts in the cold hallways of a luxury apartment were suddenly, irrevocably, intertwined. They shared meals, their knees brushing under the table. They teased each other in the kitchen. Their hands found each other instinctively whenever they crossed paths. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But for the first time it was real. And Lucy Montgomery, who had once known only duty and sacrifice, woke up each morning knowing what it felt like to be loved, not for appearances, not for obligation, but for herself. And Logan Anderson, who had built walls so high no one had ever dared to climb them, had finally let someone in. 3 months later. The sun had barely begun to cast its first golden rays over the city when Logan awoke. He reached across the bed instinctively, his hand searching for the familiar warmth of Lucy beside him, but found only cool, empty sheets. Frowning, he sat up, the quiet of the apartment suddenly feeling wrong. That's when he heard it, the faint, unmistakable sound of retching coming from the master bathroom. His chest tightened with a sudden, sharp concern. In seconds, he was out of bed, his cane forgotten as he made his way across the room, his limp more pronounced in his haste. He found her kneeling by the toilet, her face pale, her oversized sweatshirt hanging loosely from her frame. She was rinsing her mouth at the sink when she saw his reflection in the mirror. "Logan," she said, forcing a weak smile. "Did I wake you?" "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with worry as he came to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "I'm fine," she insisted, though she looked anything but. I think that pizza from last night just didn't agree with me." He tilted his head, his medical instincts kicking in, his eyes scanning her face with a careful diagnostic intensity. He noted the faint shadows under her eyes, the slight pallor of her skin, and then he noted something else. A new softness to her features, a subtle change, His expression shifted, the worry melting away, replaced by a dawning, incredulous realization. A slow smile spread across his face, wide and unrestrained. "Let me ask you a question," he said, his eyes twinkling. "When was your last period?" Lucy blinked, caught off guard. She frowned, trying to remember. "I don't know. A while ago. But that's not unusual for me. My cycle has always been irregular, especially with stress. You know that." His smile grew wider. "Irregular for how long?" He pressed gently. "I don't know, Logan. Maybe 3 months?" She shrugged, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Why are you smiling like that?" He let out a short, explosive laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that seemed to fill the entire room. "Wait right here," he said, kissing her quickly on the temple. Before she could question him, he was gone, moving faster than she'd seen him move since the accident. 15 minutes later, he returned, slightly out of breath, holding a small paper bag from the 24-hour pharmacy downstairs. He pulled out a pregnancy test and placed it on the marble countertop with the triumphant air of a man presenting a rare jewel. "Logan!" Lucy's eyes widened in shock. "You can't be serious. We can't just—" "We can. And we should," he said, his voice firm but full of a giddy excitement. "Come on, Lucy. Let's find out." Her hands trembled as she took the small box from him and disappeared into the bathroom. Logan paced outside the door like an expectant father, running his hands through his hair, muttering under his breath, "Please. Please." When Lucy finally emerged, she was pale, clutching the small plastic stick as if it were a live grenade. "I can't look," she whispered, her voice choked with a mixture of fear and hope. She pushed it into his outstretched hands. Logan looked down. The world seemed to stop for a single, silent beat. Then his face broke into a radiant, tear-filled grin. He looked up at her, his gray eyes shining with an emotion so powerful it took her breath away. "Lucy," he breathed, his voice cracking, "we're having a baby." She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "No. Are you serious?" Her knees felt weak, 1,000 emotions crashing over her at once. Terror, disbelief, and beneath it all, a wave of happiness so overwhelming it felt like it might sweep her away. Logan closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as tears of his own slid down his cheeks. He buried his face in her hair, his voice trembling with emotion. "I never thought I'd have this," he whispered. "Not after everything. But you—" He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his hands framing her face. "You didn't just give me a second chance at life, Lucy. You gave me a future." She was still shaking, half laughing and half crying. "Logan, I don't know if I'm ready for this." "You don't have to be," he said firmly, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "We'll be ready together. You and me. Always." She looked at him then, at the raw sincerity in his gaze, and her fears began to quiet. For the first time, she let the happiness take over, a brilliant, shining thing. He kissed her then, slowly, deeply, a kiss full of promises and a future she had never dared to dream of. And as they held each other in the early morning light, clutching the tiny plastic stick between them, they both understood the truth. Their story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The obstetrician's office was cool and quiet. Lucy lay on the examination table, her hand held tightly in Logan's, their eyes fixed on the grainy black and white image on the ultrasound screen. The technician moved the wand over the cold gel on her abdomen, and then, there it was, a tiny, flickering pulse of light in the center of the dark screen. "That's your baby's heartbeat," the technician said, her voice warm. Logan let out a shaky, shuddering breath beside her. Tears, hot and unrestrained, streamed down his face. Lucy turned her head to look at him, at the man she had once known as cold and distant, now completely undone by love. He looked at her, his gray eyes shining with an emotion so profound it made her own heart ache. "Our baby," he whispered, bringing her fingers to his lips and kissing them. In the weeks that followed, Logan transformed. The detached, work-obsessed surgeon was replaced by an almost obsessively doting husband. He insisted on accompanying her to every appointment, devoured every pregnancy book he could find, and began planning the nursery with a meticulous dedication that made Lucy laugh. She teased him about his intensity, but secretly, she cherished every moment of it. One afternoon, as she was resting on the sofa, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously. "Lucy, my dear." The voice was instantly recognizable. It was Vincent Anderson. "I need to speak with you and Logan. It's important." There was something different in his tone. Softer, more subdued, almost vulnerable. When Vincent arrived at the penthouse later that day, he looked as though he had aged 10 years in just a few months. The sharp, predatory confidence was gone, replaced by a weary sadness. He sat down heavily on the sofa, his gaze moving between them with an expression Lucy had never seen on his face before. Regret. "I came to apologize," he began, his voice hoarse. "For everything. For manipulating you both into this marriage. For using your mother's illness as leverage. For destroying Logan's relationship with Rebecca to serve my own ambition." Logan stiffened beside her, his body going rigid with years of ingrained resentment. But Lucy placed a calming hand on his arm, squeezing gently. "I have spent my entire life trying to buy something that money can't buy," Vincent continued, his voice thick with self-loathing. "Respect, acceptance, belonging. And in the process, I almost destroyed my only son." He looked at Logan then, tears shining in his own eyes. "You deserved better from me. You both did." Lucy watched Logan struggle with himself, decades of anger warring with this single, raw moment of honesty. Finally, Logan spoke, his voice rough with contained emotion. "Why now?" "Because I've seen the way you look at each other," Vincent said, his gaze shifting to Lucy and her gently swelling abdomen. "I've seen the love you've built in spite of me, not because of me. And I realized—" He paused, clearing his throat. "I realized I was about to lose the chance to know my grandchild because of my own foolish pride." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken history. Then Lucy, surprising even herself, spoke. "Dr. Anderson." "Vincent," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "What you did was wrong. It was manipulative. It was cruel." She took a breath, feeling Logan's eyes on her. "But it also gave us to each other. And without this forced marriage, without this impossible situation, Logan and I might never have found our way to this love." Logan looked at her, his expression a mixture of shock and awe. He turned back to his father. "Dad," he said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "You taught me a lot about medicine, about excellence, about ambition. But you never taught me about forgiveness." He paused, his hand finding Lucy's and lacing their fingers together. "Lucy taught me that, and because of her I'm willing to try." Vincent broke down then, his shoulders shaking with quiet, racking sobs. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." It was the beginning of something new. Not perfect, not without scars, but real. That night, Lucy and Logan stood on his favorite overlook, the city of Pittsburgh spread out before them like a carpet of glittering jewels. Her belly was a small, perfect curve under her dress. "Did you really forgive him?" Lucy asked softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. Logan was quiet for a long moment, watching the distant lights. "I'm trying to," he said finally. "For you. For our baby." Because I've learned from you that holding on to anger only makes you a prisoner of the past. He pulled her closer, kissing her temple. And I want to live in the present, with you. Lucy smiled, a genuine happy smile. You know my mother is already planning a ridiculously extravagant baby shower, right? She's so excited to be a grandmother. Let her, Logan murmured, his hand coming to rest on her abdomen, a look of wonder on his face. After everything she's been through, she deserves to celebrate. He looked at Lucy, his eyes full of a love so deep it felt infinite. We're really doing this, making a family. We are, Lucy confirmed, covering his hand with her own. And we're going to mess it up sometimes, and we're going to learn, and we're going to love this baby with everything we have. Just like I love you, Logan whispered, his voice full of a quiet, profound certainty. With everything that I am. 6 months later, Lucy was in a hospital delivery room, sweat beading on her forehead, her hand crushing Logan's as another contraction ripped through her body. You're doing so well, my love, Logan murmured, his calm surgeon's voice now thick with raw, unfiltered emotion. He wiped her brow with a cool cloth. One more. Just one more. I can see the head, the obstetrician announced with a cheerful grin. One more big push, Lucy. And then, a cry pierced the air. It was small and furious, and the most beautiful sound either of them had ever heard. It's a girl, the doctor announced, placing the tiny, wailing infant onto Lucy's chest. Logan looked at his daughter, and completely fell apart. Tears streamed down his face as he reached out a trembling hand to trace her tiny nose, her perfect miniature fingers, the dark fuzz of hair that was just like Lucy's. She's perfect, he whispered, his voice breaking. He looked at Lucy, his heart overflowing. You're perfect. Lucy laughed through her own tears of joy and exhaustion. We made her, Logan. We actually made her. Eleanor, Logan said suddenly, his gaze fixed on the tiny baby nestled against Lucy's skin. He looked at Lucy, his eyes pleading. Can we name her Eleanor? A fresh wave of tears spilled down Lucy's cheeks. His mother. He wanted to name their daughter after the mother he had lost so long ago. She squeezed his hand, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Eleanor Rose Anderson, she whispered. It's perfect. In the weeks that followed, their pristine penthouse transformed. The sterile, minimalist space was now filled with the chaotic, beautiful clutter of a new baby. Piles of diapers, soft blankets draped over every surface, and the sound of Eleanor's soft cries at 3 a.m. Logan, the brilliant surgeon who once operated with cold, detached precision, now stumbled through the darkened apartment in the middle of the night, singing off-key lullabies and mastering the art of the perfect swaddle. Rose was a constant, joyful presence, helping with the baby, preparing meals. Her face radiant with a happiness Lucy hadn't seen in years. I never thought I would see this day, she confessed to Lucy one afternoon, her voice thick with emotion as she held her sleeping granddaughter. After the heart attack, after losing everything, I thought my life was over. It wasn't over, Mom, Lucy said softly, watching them. It just changed. We started over. And they had. Their life wasn't the one either of them had planned, but it was real. It was a life built not on a foundation of wealth and social standing, but on something far stronger. Forgiveness, resilience, and a love that had been forged in the most impossible of circumstances. One evening, Logan came home from a long day at the hospital to find Lucy asleep on the sofa. Eleanor, sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside her. He stood there for a long moment, just watching them, the two loves of his life. He thought back to the cold, angry man he had been, the man who had stood at an altar and whispered, "Let's just get this over with." He had thought that day was an ending. He had been so wrong. It was just the beginning.